So I want you to watch the video about the Stanford Prison Experiment that I have included on Canvas, and then I want you to analyze what you find. Some important things to note are that oftentimes when people are placed in certain roles, they might engage in certain types of behavior. The critical thing to understand about this experiment is that on some level, Zimbardo encouraged this type of behavior. And with the slightest bit of encouragement, it increased the propensity for some of these people to behave in sadistic and just cruel ways to random assigned strangers. So just randomly assigned. You were either randomly assigned a guard or a prisoner. And the fact that they behaved in these ways to people who were randomly assigned who committed no crimes is just appalling. So I want you to watch it, and I want you to understand the power that a particular role can have on a person's behavior. We're going to talk about two things: self-serving bias and just world hypothesis. So self-serving bias means that you have a bias towards yourself that helps you feel better about yourself. So for example, when you win or you do well, you're going to say, I was so talented, I have a lot of skills, my team is awesome. If you lose, you might say, well, they played at home. The weather was kind of off. That always throws us off. Basically allowing you to maintain a high sense of self and ego, even in difficult situations. The just world hypothesis might also have a good side in that it might force you to work harder and feel like your efforts matter because people get what they deserve. So this idea that we live in a just world. Now, that seems okay in theory, and sometimes it can be. The problem is that you start to assume that everyone who is suffering deserves to be suffering. So if someone has cancer, if someone is homeless, you might blame that on the person instead of seeing that there might have been a lot of things in their life or a lot of systems that were in place that were unfair and that led them to this situation. Let's talk about the Milgram Experiment. So what I want you to note is that the person behind me was actually participating in the experiment. You can tell that he is struggling to finish and he feels guilty about what he has done. Okay? And most people, if you watch the videos and you look at the information, they look uncomfortable. They're sweating, their legs are shaking. They don't really want to go on, but they feel compelled to because the authority figure is telling them to, even though they personally think it's immoral. And so if you're like, oh my goodness, how many people would just continue to shock someone? Now, they weren't really shocking anyone. It was Confederates, but they thought they were. And if you're like, how many people would hurt people even when they personally knew it was wrong? Like, how could people do this? 2 out of 3 people shocked folks until they did not respond. So a lot of us would do it, okay? Before we judge this guy up here, right? And what this lets us know is that we are really inclined to obey authority figures even when we personally think it is wrong. So how do people persuade us? There are 2 different routes to persuasion that we're going to talk about. The first one is the central route. So this is when the person lays out all of the facts, they identify the source of the information, and then they explain to you why picking them is the best logical choice for you. Okay? So they try to convince you with information. The next one is the peripheral route. So this is when people try to make you feel a certain way or associate themselves with something positive. So they might pair themselves often with certain symbols or certain colors to make you feel a certain way when you look at them. Whether that's warm and fuzzy if they're trying to sell you something, or whether that's strong and brave if they want you to believe something. Regardless, they try to pair themselves with good signals and signs so that every time you see them, you are convinced that they are communicating something important to you. So if you're wondering how they decide, it depends on the audience. So we're going to talk about a few more things. I want you to make sure you review all the information available on Canvas and the PowerPoint because this is a really dense section. So what we're going to talk about next is something called confirmation bias. What this means is that you already have a pre-existing idea. Most of us have these, right? And we want to confirm that idea. And so when we're exposed to a barrage of evidence, we usually only remember the bits that play into what we already think, unless we are making a conscious effort not to do so. Okay? So if you have an idea that a type of person is likely to engage in a behavior, you might be shown 5 examples of a person not doing that, but you'll remember the one example where they are because that is already what you're programmed to see. Basically, you see what you think you are going to see, and you're more inclined to remember it. So you have to make a conscious effort not to do it. We went over this at the very beginning of the semester, but it bears repeating.